So I've just got back from a camping trip with my extended family, and during the week I challenged myself to find out what the Bible teaches about patience. And actually I found out some really interesting things, including 4 tips that are really helpful, which I'm going to tell you about. But first, here's what went down. So we're in the car, we're halfway to camping. Children have gone in the car with Grandma. We have the car to ourselves, which is rather exciting. This is my husband Rod. I'm forcing Rod to listen to podcasts on patience. Rod, interview. How do you think Zoe's gone on patience this week?
Well, it hasn't improved so far, put it that way.
I've been so cranky this week. Which fruit of the Spirit do you think I need to work on the most?
Ouch. I think they come as a package. I think working on one fruit of the Spirit feels a bit like legalism, whereas the image of fruit grows organically as we work on our relationship with Him and submit to Him and as He changes us. So it feels to me like it's tail wagging a dog.
But I do think that there are spiritual disciplines that require training like an athlete,
Yes.
which don't just happen, you have to work on them.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily legalism.
I don't disagree with that. I think you definitely do need to exercise spiritual disciplines. I'm not convinced as an approach to the fruit of the Spirit that we say, I'm going to work on patience rather than, if the Spirit produces patience, I'm going to work on intimacy with God. We're going to find out more, I guess.
So he's waiting for God. He's waiting to hear from God. And he says, I will station myself on the ramparts.
Right, so we're 20 minutes from the campsite, 11 minutes, and now I'm putting up the new old trailer tent in the dark and the new bunk bed thing without the children getting freezing cold because it is winter. So that's going to be fun.
On the plus side, I would say you're being more patient about this than you normally are. So.
Really? And you, although Ron is actually an extremely patient person. I'm not sure your patience comes out of lethargy rather than some spiritual understanding of God. But I'm going to be focusing on God's patience to me and my lack of omniscience whilst putting up this tent. That is what I'm going to be doing. So we've arrived at camping. We have put up the tent. We have a quick nip to the beach. Literally pitch dark. Right. Maybe...
Oh, I can see water, light.
Ooh, going downhill.
The waves seem very close.
Maybe this is an illustration of our lack of ability to see the whole picture. In fact, we can only see like 2 foot in front of us. Whereas God knows the big picture. So many challenges setting the tent up. I have to say, in terms of patience and remembering in humility God is omniscient and we're not, I didn't have many thoughts about that as I was getting annoyed with the children for losing various things and refusing to do what they were told. Did you feel like the patience element of the fruit of the Spirit was growing in you?
Can't say I was conscious of it. I was very glad to get some food.
I think the fruit of the Spirit are more likely to grow on a full stomach. That's not a theological insight. Quick update, just realised that we took no notice of where the entrance to the beach was. So now we can't actually find how to get back to the campsite.
We might get a good patience test happening here.
Yes, finally found it. There were sandcastles in front of it. Is this it?
Yeah.
Is that it? What's that? Okay, we're here. We're back at the campsite. Hurrah. Praise the Lord. It is day 2 camping, so I'm going to give you a day 1 update on how things are going. It's 6:30 in the morning. I've just come out to have a little look at the beach. So when we arrived on the night we arrived, it was too dark to set up the gazebo. So the next morning we tried to set it up, and several patience challenges. Asked my husband to read the instructions. Husband doesn't realise that we needed to have read the instructions, and that I end up crawling underneath the tent in the dust. And so by this stage I'm cranky because I'm covered in dust, thinking, why did my husband not read the instructions? Because this always happens. And then he gets a little bit cross. I get even crosser. I decide to go and brush my teeth in a huff. Yes, distinct lack of patience. I guess that was a moment to consider the things that God has given us and the patience He's spent with us, and give my husband a bit of that patience. I was looking at some Bible verses yesterday, and there's a pretty interesting one. Let me just sit down and I'll show you this. So I've put my iPad down, hope it doesn't get covered in sand, to show you. The first one is Colossians 3:12, which says, "Put on there as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. In the car, me and Rod were talking about that patience comes as a kind of package with some other Christian virtues. So we've got compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another, and forgiving. And it seems that those qualities, they're all got the same flavour. I mean, it does describe Jesus, doesn't it? It's that gentle person who is willing, out of humility, to consider others more than themselves, to be compassionate, to put others before themselves. He's right in the centre of it. I think if you are growing the fruit of patience, it comes as a kind of cluster. As we develop humility, then we become more patient and compassionate, and we're able to bear with each other, and we forgive. And I think as a person who's not very gentle or very patient, in a sense it's encouraging to see that it comes as a cluster. So it's almost like buy one get one free. That's not really a biblical idea, but you develop these things as a whole. It's the fruit of the Spirit. The whole character changes, which is kind of good, because it always feels for me a bit hopeless that I have these things I can't do and I won't do. And actually, as we grow in one area, other areas grow too. Maybe that's an encouragement. Anyway, I'll give you an update on how day 2 goes and some more thoughts on patience. Over and out. So, got my morning coffee. Some update on day 2. So yesterday, the rest of the rallies arrived. So I am now a group of 14. They are all super nice and super patient. But just negotiating family camping with 14 people has its challenges. I am the cause of many challenges for other people, I'm sure. And I did read a couple of interesting things yesterday, so I'm not quite sure what to do with them. One was about God's anger. The most frequent 2 words used for anger, the noun, in Hebrew is actually heat or nose. They use metaphors for it instead of a literal word meaning anger. So God felt heat or God felt nose. And when you are very angry or you feel heat in your nose, like in a Looney Tunes cartoon, when someone's really angry, they have steam coming out of their kind of ears and their nose. And I think it's that idea where you flare your nostrils when you get really angry. So when the Bible says God is long-suffering or patient, the literal phrase is long-nostriled. So it kind of means it takes a long time for his nostrils to be activated, which is interesting. Not quite sure what to do with that at the moment, but that's point 1. The other one is more practical. Let me just find it. Got my iPad here. It's a great article by Wyatt Graham, whoever he is, called Listening as Patience, which starts off talking about Psalm 46 verse 10, be still and know that I am God. And basically says that our lack of patience is often seen in a lack of listening. But when we do listen, that is a sign of patience. I am not a good listener. I'm an extremely good talker. And I think that to become more patient, I could listen more. There's a great quote in this article. Listening is a form of sacrifice because we put aside our worries, cares and interest for the moment and we focus on someone else's. We bear their burdens, we carry their hardships. I think this connection of patience and humility comes in. So listening is a sign of humility, isn't it? And listening is a sign of gentleness and meekness and compassion and all those other qualities that were in the Bible verse from Colossians that I was talking about yesterday. So that's thoughts for today. I'm going to think about listening in response to just God's character. I think today we're going to go to the beach up north. Yeah, so weather's glorious. Onwards and upwards. Bye. So I've just stopped the car. I'm by myself. I had to go and do an errand. And I've been listening to a sermon by John Piper, and it suddenly dawned on me that I've got this whole patience thing upside down. I thought I was making a video about patience with respect to irritating things that other members of my family do on a camping trip. But I've just realised the bigger thing that is at play, which is my impatience with God and the situation he puts me in. And that is far bigger and more important than any small issue I have with other people, I think, being annoying. The sermon was about a time in the Exodus where God takes the people of Israel to Rephidim, which is a place with no water in the desert, and they say, did you bring us out here to die? You don't love us, you don't want to look after us, what the heck are you doing? And the point is that they are crazy because God has done incredible acts to look after them already. He's made promises to Abraham that he's going to bless them as a people, and he's chosen a place with no water. They rumble and they quarrel. There's no sense of understanding that even if there's no water there, God obviously will look after them. Like, that's his whole promise and point. So whether he could suspend the laws of meteorology and rain in the desert to give them water, or whether he would suspend the laws of biology and their very body cells no longer needing H2O, every single atom in the universe is under his control. He can obviously look after them, but instead they refuse. And their lack of patience and humility to accept his plan and his work is the problem. I feel like we've had, maybe the same for you, just 10 years of stuff that's repeatedly gone wrong again and again, and just begun to think, yeah, God, why the heck have you brought us here? I am sick of this. I don't know who you are anymore, but I don't trust you. And I feel my lack of patience, that lack of patience, not being willing to wait, even when we're in the equivalent of a Rephidim type of place where there's no water and it seems a disaster, is where I am. And it's having patience to wait for God's plan in that situation, to trust God and not question his motives. Fine to cry out to him and see that the solutions will come from him, but also to have patience to wait for him to unfold things as he chooses. Anyway, I better go because I've got to go home. More thoughts on that later. Adios. So camping is nearly over. The patience thing is definitely a work in progress, but I do think the week has made a difference and I've learned some stuff. So I want to bring it all together as we leave with these 4 really helpful tips that I learned about patience from the books of James and Job. So let's start with James chapter 5. So James gives us here 2 examples of patience to copy. He says in verse 7, "Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains." So Israel's this hot, dry country. It's only got 2 short seasons with rain in which you can plant, which is why James says, see how patient the farmer is for the autumn and spring rains. But if the farmer's impatient and he plants outside of this, then his crop dies. So the farmer has to yield to the larger situation to the right time, because the rain, the blessing, is coming, but it might not be now. So for us, instead of anxiety, impatience and anger, we need to wait and yield for God's timings. So that's tip number 1. Patience grows as we humbly accept God's current provision and timings. The second example is Job. Let's look at verse 11. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. Now, persevered is often translated as patience. It's hupomeno in the Greek, hupo, hypo, which basically means under, and meno, where we get the word remain, or to stay. So it's to be under, but to remain, to not budge, to keep staying. And that is Job all over. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. Job had an absolutely terrible time. It was horrific. He lost his house, his wealth, all his children. And he didn't stoically say, well, that's okay, I don't care, I trust God. He was not happy at all. But every step, he never stops praying. He took his complaints to God because he knew God had the answers.
And I think that's a key to patience. We stay fast under suffering whilst knowing that only God can provide the answers. So we keep calling on him. And that's tip number 2. Patience grows when we keep praying about our problems. Now, the other thing we can copy from Job is seeing how he thinks in chapter 23 of Job. In verse 8, Job says about God, "But if I go to the east, he's not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him." God is beyond Job. He's too big, too other for Job to ever have the full picture of what he's doing. When he's at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. Sometimes it's just really hard to see what God is doing. But like Job, we've got to acknowledge that. And that leads to patience. So that's tip number 3. Patience grows when we humbly acknowledge that we don't have the big picture. And that's what's really struck me this week. But Job goes on, verse 10, "But he knows the way that I take." God knows where Job needs to be right now, because these things he's putting Job through will turn him into something very special. And it's the same for us. When he has tested me, Job says, I shall come forth as pure gold. So it takes humility, prayer, and faith to get there. But after we've hupomenoed, after we've remained under the test and been driven to God in prayer, into his love, we become more wise, more golden. Patience grows as we see that suffering makes us golden. But it doesn't end there, because I learned even more about patience actually in the week before we went camping. Leaking tents, dodgy kit, general family chaos. Check out the video here.